So that was the intention of it.
Or a specialist contractor, of course.
Oh, absolutely. Sorry. Yes, most certainly. Well, principally, that's what we're trying to tackle, isn't it? Who's now? I've been doing some work in preparation that I'm going to share this afternoon, which I'd like to show you with regard to what we're doing next week. And obviously, I'd like to give Matt and Yarek the opportunity to just show the work that they've done since Monday, which has been very helpful. So shall I go ahead and do that? Debbie, do you want to? I don't want to take over your meeting.
No. I think that's fine, George. I think we've got that. Then we've got the DCW event, yes, and then you wanted to also touch base on some of the work that CIH and BRE have done in terms of DCOM, and also the work I'm involved in terms of the value toolkit and value-based decision making, which should influence some of this. And then there's just some practical things, a couple of other practical things to go through. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So as far as next week is concerned, this isn't just for the people that are attending next week. It's a matter of being able to get the knowledge from across the different working groups, so that we know what we're asking for. But the exam question that we're trying to get answered is what information is needed by each of the different stakeholder groups.
Explanation. That's not. This is the value proposition. You explain that.
Sorry, Richard, is that you talking?
Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah. So the principal thing is to find what information, or to be able to define what information is needed by each of the different stakeholder groups to ensure that, first of all, the element that they're particularly interested in is going to perform when it needs to perform. And secondly, how do we ensure that that is recorded in a digital form that therefore can provide the evidence that it's being considered? Now, the reason this is particularly important, I think, is talking it through with manufacturers. For example, a fire door manufacturer. I've spoken to a couple of fire door manufacturers who are going to attend on the day, and each of them now has realised the importance of them having a record of where their doors have been installed, and also how they've been installed. Now, that's great, but the solutions that they are, the two or three I've spoken, or two of the three that I've spoken to, they're actually doing that in isolation to the rest of the BIM process. They're capturing it in a software application that will provide a plan for them with photographs for them and captured for them, but it won't then make it easy to tie it in with the detail of the dry lining or the dampers and the like. And therefore, that's something from a software engineering point of view, an information management point of view, that we need to be able to address. That's not to stop people using any other application. It's more to make sure that we're actually locating that. And also, it needs to be that the FMs have got the information that are needed, and also, other people in the main contractors, for example. Main contractors need to know what's been installed in the buildings. And what we don't want, in my view, is for this information to be held in inaccessible places, or places that, or in a form that then doesn't glue together. So to clarify that, there's a few new people. I see Patrick's on the call now. Patrick Wilson. Hello, Patrick. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, George. Everybody else, in listening mode.
No, that's okay. Yeah. So what we're doing, my plan for next week was to look at things from a point of view of we've got 3 different systems that need to act to protect against the risk of spread of smoke. So we've got the risk, which is the spread of smoke. We're mitigating that through the compartment, and then also the detection system and the smoke control system. But the smoke control system shouldn't really be needed if the compartment works. Is that right? Have I got that right? Broadly? Okay, good. So therefore, if that's the case, then
not exactly, George, because sometimes you need to divert the smoke, or not only stop it, but you may need to divert it away, or just prevent of it moving, basically close the passage of air to basically stop the spread of fire as well.
Okay, understood. But maybe simplistically, Eric, what I'm doing is I'm trying to just concentrate on one risk, which is the spread of smoke. I appreciate the spread of fire is probably one and the same thing, but if we can, my view is, tell me if you disagree. My view is if we can try and focus on the spread of smoke, then we've got more of a chance of getting an answer on the day.
We just need to consider that sometimes the smoke may be in the emergency escape route, which will need to be cleared to allow the escape.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So that could go into the emergency escape route, even if the compartment doesn't fail.
I see what you're saying now. I'm not sure.
Okay. Paul, you might be able to help with that.
Right, yeah, so the fire doors on the escape route will just open and close as they would do. If they've been held open on maglocks, then the maglocks should release them. The main issue is where doors have been used into the smoke extract shaft, which is allowed on natural systems, not on mechanical systems, but on natural systems. And the one on the fire floor will have to open to allow the smoke to escape. But the others will remain closed, because then basically you've extended the compartment of the escape route into the shaft. Yeah, so that's the only issue, and some of the actuators on the doors that are used for smoke control are not fire door tested actuators, because they need to be tested, because on the floors that are shut, they need to stay shut because they're fire doors there. And a lot of people just put ordinary actuators on to open them, but they haven't realised that a fire door set is a combination of all the parts, and that the actuator is one of those parts that needs to be tested. So, and of course, on these doors, there's no catches, so there's no catches to hold them shut. So it is only the actuator that's holding them shut, and maybe some intumescent seals, but they're not really that mechanical.
So for us to be able to get to an answer, because basically we've got probably 20 minutes to sort this through with groups of 10 people. We want to try and get to something that's a clear answer. Should we therefore restrict the perspective and say that the fire door we're talking about is the entrance door to the flat? So it's the fire door we're talking about is part of the compartment, which is protecting the smoke that's being generated from within the flat. So if I look at the example that Paul McSolly has done,
Yeah, sorry, George. Yeah, while you're putting that up, if you're trying to find it, there are various other issues as well, because you may have cross corridor doors, because a lot of this is to do about the length of escape routes. So if you were to move a door, you might increase the length of an escape route, and that's not allowed. So there's as I keep trying to say, there's a lot of three-dimensional stuff going on here.
No, I appreciate that, but in terms of to try and keep it in a relatively, sort of focused way, so that we can get to an answer, because part of it is what I'm trying to understand is, if you're a fire door manufacturer, or fire door manufacturer and then fire door installer, what information do we need to know from that installer of that door? Say, for example, we've got a door here, which is the entrance door to the flat. It goes onto a corridor. And it's going into a 60-minute fire resistant wall. My thought is that we say, right, what information do we need to know about that door to be able to ensure that, from the developer's perspective, they've got the information they need, the main contractor's perspective, they've got the information they need, and also maybe the maintenance team, or all the different stakeholders, designers, etc. What do we need to know about that door? And also, what do we also need to know about the other elements that may go to make up that compartment? So in this particular example, we don't have any dampers identified, I don't think. So we possibly need to add those. And I know in the work that Yarrick and Matt have done, we've got another example that's got some of that in it. But my suggestion, Paul, is that we try and answer this particular question first, and then that's probably going to be enough for us to be able to at least get people thinking along the right lines. What do you think?
Yes, I mean that basically makes sense. So yes, you need to know the details of the wall construction and the details of how that door should be installed in that wall, and what space you need around that hole that you're going to put the door into, to allow it to be fitted correctly.
Yes.
And I've never quite worked this out, but some fire doors are allowed to be half the rating of the construction, and this might be one of those. So
yeah, that's what you're saying. That's at FD30, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So whereas other places it might need to be equivalent to, but in this case it's I think it's half. So that essentially is the issue with that door. And it needs to be self-closing, and that's about it, really.
Yeah. So it's probably not. So the point that was made after the meeting that we had on Monday, I spoke with the BRE and they gave me an example. So I was talking to them about what goes wrong, and I think that's where I'm thinking of flipping this round to identify more of what goes wrong with these situations, and then come back and say, what information do we need to stop them going wrong? It might be a more fruitful way of getting some good stuff out. And
George, I mean, would it be possible that eventually we could do some things like, design compliance checks, define what should be in the compliance check for this? Yes, because that would be very helpful to many people, and a practical way of implementing it.
yes, yeah. I mean, the thing I've been working, so jumping around a bit here, but so this is a graphic that Paul provided from one of his existing projects, And he then related that back to approved document B. And he talked about firefighting shafts. And he was explaining to me that this is, it's made up of a number of different elements. And we've got then the different type of dampers that are involved and how approved document B. But the danger with this, for me, he's got down here some specifications that we need to capture against these things. But I think we're just going down a rabbit hole in terms of what we can do next week. So I need to just get a feel from you as to whether we're going to go into too much detail there. I'll also show you just looking at what Yarrick, do you want to pull up what you and Matt have done? Would you mind?
Yeah, just 1 second. I just copied and pasted some, or I wanted to, hold on. I did some perspectives of what I need to know about door. Just get ready.
You know the graphic that you did on Zero?
Yeah, I'm just bringing it up. Get my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen.
Can you make it a bit bigger?
Yeah. First of all, I'm using this Mirror app. I don't know if any of you knows it and use it already, and it's a brilliant platform. Can be shared. It's like a web browser type of environment where you can do a lot of graphics and so on. Very good to bring in, link in documents, live PDFs, websites, and so on to create quite interesting, nice looking visuals. So what I've done, I didn't have a probably best image of a door set within the corridor, but that's what I had for now. And then Matt sent me some photographs and comments regarding the issues related to walls and doors. And this is like very much a work in progress, where I basically added the image of a corridor section, and I started adding comments of what the possible what do we need to be aware of. So that's answering one of the questions, the actions we're trying to do. So, for example, there is a need for emergency lighting, and then I just listed in one of the comments, depending whether the door will have a vision panel or not. And then I may need 2 emergency lights or 1, depending what's happening, whether there is a vision panel. There's a need for exit signage, what standards it needs to be complied with. This may be illuminated or photoluminescent. If it's photoluminescent, you have to have a emergency light in specific distance away from it. You may or may not have sprinkler. You may have PA. You will have a smoke detection system. You may have a void detection system. Then this is not finished, but this is actually quite a good example of a real life scenario problem where the containment and MEP services are spread so thin because there is a beam on the other side that there's not much space basically to avoid the door jams in here. So it's clashing at the moment. Then I've added Matt's photographs and then kind of pointed out where that occurs and what the problems are. I'm not gonna go through all the details now, but that's out there, and I can share this with all of you, whoever wants it, and you could then basically add your comments to it live, which should be a nice way to develop it, provided this is.
Can I?
You're happy to do it. Go on.
Can I just correct one thing, because unfortunately this is right in the scope of my knowledge base, and that is over any externally illuminated sign, whether it be a non-maintained sign, whether it be an ordinary white PV sign or a photoluminescent sign, they all need to have emergency lighting over them. A photoluminescent sign is an externally illuminated sign, and it could be considered for a photoluminescent sign that it's suitable and sufficient illumination for the required viewing distance. So it does have huge amounts of benefit. So a lot of people believe that photoluminescence needs emergency lighting over it. They don't. They can effectively work without emergency lighting. So if I could just correct that false impression about photoluminescent signs, it might help people.
Yeah, I see what you're coming from, but it's a bit more complex than that. But yeah, the gist of it is more or less what you said. But there's still regs of telling you how far from the sign I need emergency lights. But the general purpose of it is to illuminate the floor to allow escape.
Exactly.
And then illumination of the sign, if it's photoluminescent, you could, as long as it has been exposed to lighting for enough duration to allow the escape so people can see the sign, then you may not need the emergency light. I understand.
But the British standard requires any external illuminated sign that's either a non-maintained electrical light or any externally illuminated sign to be illuminated at 100 lux to the vertical face at all times. So from that point of view, there is already a standard for illumination of signs, and it's one that again is absolutely disregarded in lots of circumstances.
Well, that's exactly why we need to build this in, don't we, Jim? So that people aren't misinterpreting that.
So this is, if we're looking at housing, this is generally cross corridor doors and maybe doors into service risers. You shouldn't be having a lot of these surfaces going into a protected stairwell, and hopefully not too many of them going into the individual flats, although you may have indication of a fire in an individual flat. But normally that would just be sounding within the flat itself, but you might need to get the power in and out. The other issue, and it sometimes certainly with regard to student accommodation, you might want to be putting ventilation in there, but mostly ventilation and stuff will be within the flat itself, but you may well have heating pipes and stuff going in. So the services above the ceiling, which is essentially what this is, depending on what type of door it is, you could have lots of different stuff, which I think Yarrick has very ably demonstrated there. Apart from the fact he's managed to fit it all in, usually there's less space than that.
And more services.
Yes.
I mean, it's I would say we often see this above the entrance doors for apartments. You know, stick a couple of ducts in there as well, and absolutely no space for the door jambs, and you've got a sort of typical scenario. Jarek, apologies for not getting back to you on your email yesterday. You mentioned about the what happens in cross corridor doors, and when you have got all of this above sort of running through the corridor, you don't have the opportunity for door jambs. And we've mentioned previously about enhanced transoms, which manufacturers aren't using anymore. There are ways to deal with it. It needs to be considered at early stages. So, for example, what we would normally look at in that scenario is to use a hot rolled section within the adjoining wall. And whether the wall the other side is a concrete wall, or whether that's, if it's dry lining, again, another hot rolled section, that needs to be suitably fire protected, so suitably encased with board, primarily, or potentially painted, but ideally encased with board. And then you'd effectively be building a wall above that section and you'd be using that as your structure. So you then effectively lower the structure from the slab to underneath the surfaces, and then build your door jambs up to the underside of that steel structure, rather than
like kind of a brace, kind of a structure bracing.
Absolutely, yes. So either a H frame or an up and over sort of goalpost arrangement. The issues when this is introduced is that it's almost always introduced too late. So by the time the specialist contractor's involved and is able to say this is required because we must have structure to structure door jambs. Normally the services are sort of fairly inflexible at that point. They have to be in that location, and quite often we're looking at a situation where sometimes the ceiling height being right underneath the services, we don't have the opportunity to get steel work in there. Then with the wall thicknesses, sometimes if you're looking at putting an SHS or something within a wall, that's going to affect the thickness of the wall footprint in that location. So there are all sort of complications that really need to be, this type of thing needs to be identified early. If it's identified early, it's not an issue. If it's identified at the 11th hour, huge issue.
So Matt,
Sorry.
sorry, just to, because what I'm concerned about is that what we've got here is fantastic, because we've got a number of different conversations going on in terms of how we're going to avoid the problem happening in the first place, right? But I think that what we need to do for this particular workshop is to say, what information does the developer need? What information does Balfour Beatty need? I see that Callum's joined, to ensure that they've got the digital record that they need to evidence that the job's been done properly. And I think what you've done is great, because it's giving a really good example of the complexity, and the point exactly, just that conversation for a couple of minutes about the signage, for example, is a good example of that. But what information do because it's also it's how the individual asset types work to provide that compartmentation. And I think probably from what you've said, what Paul was just saying there about the fire staircase, as it were, maybe that makes it. I think we perhaps need to move away from what Paul Matsoli was suggesting there, and that's looking at the fire shaft, because that's possibly broadening the discussion too wide. I think that my vision, wrongly perhaps, is that we've got a fire or something in the flat. How do we stop the smoke from coming out, and then through that wall or through the various different walls that it could be affected by? And then how do the other elements like the smoke dampers and things protect against that? And then if they fail, how do we extract the smoke? That was, and how do we then evidence that? I think all of that is a good 45 minutes for us to discuss. What do you think? Am I driving it down the wrong route?
Sorry, I just need to jump in because I need to go. I've already overrun 2 minutes. I've got another meeting running now. You got this if you want to discuss this further. But what I was trying to say, if you have a better example of the corridor section with the door, if you could send it to me, I will then collate all the bits and change basically and work on that, what you see on the screen to improve on it. And if you can maybe chip in and help, let me know, and I can add you and share the access with you. Maybe you could help developing it. If you think this is a good idea, by the way, I don't want to recreate things. But while I was working on this, I'm thinking as a preventative measure during the design stage, to avoid certain issues, perhaps we could advise to include like a clearance zone above the door as part of the door design package. so this can be then used to avoid clashes with services above. I don't know if you think that's a good idea, but it would be from my perspective.
I think that's a good idea.
Absolutely. Yep. I think anything like that, which for me, something that would highlight the critical stud locations. So door jams, corners. Obviously, you can't cut through a corner with a service, but the number of times we see it within the designs, those types of things that if you're cutting through a critical stud location, there needs to be some other measure in there to maintain the structure.
Yeah.
Okay, Jarek, thank you very much for your.
Thank you, Jarek. Yes, very practical. Very practical. I mean, for me, it's always interesting is who is the primary decision maker around all of these things, you know, and the different timelines of stuff is another interesting aspect that we have to consider.
Yeah, can I just pick up on that? Thank you. That's great, Debbie, because that feeds into perfectly. We could have rehearsed that. What I wanted to suggest. You may or may not have seen this, but this is a distillation of the you know, the individual sheets that we've done for, you know, for example, a smoke damper. I think all of you will have seen these. So we've got what the risk is. Importantly, and this is where I'm thinking that we should look at here. What are the things that people that people do or that are done which compromise the ability of the smoke damper or the door or the smoke detector to perform? So first of all, we've got a long list here of all of these things, and then we've got the information that people who are experts in smoke dampers say are things that we need to collect information on. So, and we've obviously also got the tasks and things like that. But what I've done, I've copied those into this spreadsheet so that we can look across the different asset types. So that the ones that I'm including here, and I probably should put fire signage back in again, but I was just trying to, you know, limit it. We've got fire doors, smoke dampers, the dry lining, penetration seals, the detector, and the AOV. And these are the lists. These are the items that were in that list of in the documents that came out of the round table sessions.
Yeah, the full documents. But can you share this, George? Could it be useful just to, yeah.
What I want to do is just say, what if you agree with me that this is a worthwhile thing doing, we can look here at fire doors, for example. These are the things that the people in fire doors or smoke dampers have said were things that go wrong. And then this is the information about those things that we need to collect. So what I've started to do here, and this is where I could do with some help, is to then look at each of these properties and say who should be providing that information. So some of the information will come from manufacturers, some will come from trade contractors, some might come from the FMs. And I'm thinking that for the 5 or 6 asset types that we're focusing on for this particular exercise, that's potentially a useful way of doing it, because then we can allocate some responsibility against those things. What do you think?
Yeah,
Sorry,
seems sensible to me, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, George. It still comes back to, and this is a point I do try and make regularly, a lot of this comes down to space availability. And because of the space, sorry, somebody's just sent something to a printer right next to my microphone, but hopefully you can't hear that.
Yeah.
The space is the key issue, because there's got to be room around the door to fit the bits of the door. There's got to be room around each pipe so you can get the penetration seal in. There's got to be room around everything. And the people who need to know that are the people who are providing that space right at the very start. And if they don't provide that space, then they just say, "Oh, just solve the problem." That's the bit that we all run into problems with, because right at the start, they just put a little square box in. So they just say, "I want a 200 by 300 duct there and an 800 by 600 door," but they don't take into account that around that you've got to build the drywalling partition around it safely, and you need a certain amount of space around the door to do that. You've got to fit the damper in and have a certain amount of space around that, and then you've got to put any pipes and cables in separately, not in the same hole, and you've got to have enough space around the pipes and cables to get the penetration seal in. So you can't just say, "I want 10 pipes going through that hole," because they have to be spaced so that you can fit all this other stuff. And it's this three-dimensional volume. I think somebody called it volume, possibly Garrick last time. This three-dimensional volume is absolutely critical right at the start.
Yeah, so
they've got to have space for inspection. Space is so important for inspection.
Yes.
Can I share screen for 2 seconds just to demonstrate what Paul's saying there? George, you've seen this photo already.
Yep.
It's one that I sent over to Jarek, but bear with me for 1 second. Can everyone see that? It's okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So here we've got a fire damper. We've got a section of this is a 2-hour section of petition, supposedly. And this is supposed to be a service opening that's been capped off with the same layers of board which are on the face of the wall, which should be 2 layers. And you can quite clearly see here, this is the edge of the stud. Now, what's happened is either this has changed in size or the structural opening has only been allowed to the edge of the stud, not to the edge of the board. So what we've got here is, and quite whether the sequence was the board had gone in and was then cut away, or whether the dry line has come in after this is what I'm assuming is the situation after this is in place and boarded in accordance with a builder's work drawing rather than actually what's there. But then as well as that, you've got all of the control units up here, which again are cutting through the boarding. So we've got a situation here, which is exactly what I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but what you're referring to here, and this isn't coordinated properly to allow the correct amount of space. There should be a space around this anyway, and that's not been properly coordinated between the 2 works packages.
Yeah, no, and that's this is my whole point, that most of the time there's the space and the means of installation is just not even thought about at the start. And I think in one of the other meetings we had somebody say, "Well, we don't know anything about this. We just say we've got to put this in there," but they have to give us space, and this is the problem, and they have to accept that things have to be installed correctly, otherwise they don't work, and that's what and they're up there. People used to get around it by leaning on people and saying, "Oh, will you say that that's all right?" And people commercially said, "Yeah, that's all right." It's not happening anymore, finally, because it's too much of a commercial risk. So,
Paul, I was just about to bring Callum in, actually, so I'm pleased that you've popped up there, Callum, because I think this is the point, really, isn't it? that what we're trying to do at the moment is say at Gateway 2, for example, when the design is supposed to be complete, then what does the client need to check for? I think to some extent, this is coming back on the conversations that we've been having over the last few months. That is that this spatial coordination needs to probably be done at Gateway 1. And then the detailed element needs to be done by Gateway 2. But therefore, Callum wears two hats. He's both you're both a developer, aren't you, Callum? But you're also you manage as Balfour Beatty. You're a construction company as well. What would you say to this?
I mean, that example that Matt just threw up there, I mean, that's just not to any tested detail. That's non-compliant. I mean, I wouldn't have that. I would class that as a defect, and I'd have the contractor back in to remediate that now. It's unsafe. I don't think that's anything to do with spatial coordination, though. I think that's just shoddy workmanship. And I get what you're saying. I've seen many examples of lack of spatial coordination where you can't get to anything to maintain it. But funnily enough, whenever that's happened, we've always managed to reroute whatever's been in the way. So again, that if we do the spatial coordination early and get the tested details available early, and we get the tradesmen to follow the tested details, I think a lot of the issues go away. But it's easier doing that early in the project while it's under construction than doing it when it's operational. Now I straddle construction and operational phases, and the majority of my work takes place operationally, in full view of the client. So I think what the approach you're taking, George, I think it's correct, but I think it can be simplified, and I think we get into too much detail in this forum at times.
Yeah.
I can take on board all the frustrations, because I've got the same frustrations as everybody on this forum. But I think we need to kind of concentrate on what the deliverable is, and take a view that we're not just looking at one project in particular. This has got to apply to every project, even though every project's different.
I think that's very, very true. Yeah. So I guess, I mean, I'm also trying to best, understand how do we answer the exam question. And yeah. So any suggestions you've got about how we can simplify that would be brilliant.
Okay, yeah, no problem. We can talk offline. And I realise I've been on the periphery of this. I jumped from meeting to meeting. Sorry for joining late today.
No, not at all. Yeah.
But from your experience, Callum, has there been a real ground seed change in the last 2 years, specifically about inspections?
There's been a ground seed change in almost every aspect of how I interact with the contractor. Although the main contractor is Balfour Beatty, I work for Balfour Beatty Investments, and on these projects, I normally work for the RDP, the Residential Development Partnership. So I work in a lot of student accommodation projects at the moment. So I'm definitely on the client side when I'm doing my inspections, but I interact with the client, interact with the contractor because the parent company. Obviously, there's a link there. I'm getting a lot more buy-in than I ever have in the past.
And what about resources? What about resources for your work?
In what way?
Well,
Type of resource.
people, rather than having to just do your job on 5 projects, have you got now at least 3 people?
Well, there's a team that I work with that straddle all the pre-construction projects, construction and operational projects. So we've got a team that covers that. In terms of resources, we manage the whole of the UK with the resources we've got, and the projects we've got live. So it's not an issue. And there's a quite an initiative on at the moment, as you can see from behind me, right first time, which has got senior executive buy-in. So it's top down and bottom up, and we're looking for a culture change in what we're delivering, to make sure we deliver it first time. It's all about client satisfaction and getting, you know, new projects, rework, cutting down on rework, cutting down on defects, cutting down on all the bad practices that are endemic within the industry, to be honest.
And just to reinforce that, Jim, we've actually, that seems to be across the board with, well, quite a few of the big contractors that are now getting involved as far as BIM4Housing is concerned, and they're also willing to collaborate, which is also excellent, because it means that specialist subcontractors don't then have to you know, have to be doing different things for different people. That's what the standard is here.
The reason I asked that question is because it does come back to this proportionality of what we're going to have to be delivering. If we've got huge maintenance checklists like we have on that spreadsheet you just showed, then it's not going to serve its purpose, because, you know, you can't do all of that. I mean, it's a wish list, but if we're not having defects in that area, then we're not actually prioritizing that which is absolutely essential.
And that's the function of this group and the other groups. We want to try and get down to the 5 bits of information we need at each stage to satisfy the requirements. So it might be that we're asking for quite a lot of information that might be in a data sheet that's coming through from the manufacturer, or it might be through referencing a specification or something like that. That's fine. So as long as the information is accessible in a document, so that Callum, when he's running the building, can access it. But conversely, some of the information is business critical, and therefore that needs to be digital, because we need to make sure that we've got it. And, you know, for example, Matt gave us the example on Monday of the weight of the door, and that's something that's pretty straightforward, that we could say that a fire door supplier needs to provide the weight and also the width of the door in a machine readable format, so that it can then be tested and validated. So all of the question then is, going back to my spreadsheet, which of those properties is critical? And the only people that can answer that is people like you and Matt and well, no, actually, you would be able to answer it from your perspective.
Yeah.
But it might well be that the you know, Steve, for example, as a building safety manager or a client, he would need different information, because he probably wants to know who the installer was and also what are the component parts, because he's going to have to replace them in 10 years' time. So therefore, he wants to know where to get those replacement parts from. I mean, when I was talking with the fire door people this week, you know, nobody seems to record the torque of the fire door closer, which that may or may not be important. But I was told on Monday that that was a safety critical thing, because somebody replaced the door closer with a more aggressive one, and when it closed, it actually, and this is across the whole project, it damaged the, you know, it slammed, and that constant slamming then made a breach in the wall.
Yeah, risk on a, but that's the other thing, is that, you know, when you say risks, when I look at some of the lists, and I was to put a number on some of the risks, they're extremely low, and I wondered how risk averse we're going to get with.
No, I agree, and of all those risks, that's why I've picked out spread of smoke, or spread of fire, or in other words, we need to make it consumable, don't we? That's the point that I think you're making. What is there are some of the risks, because those roundtable sessions, in many cases, were brain dumps of people who have got experience. That's something that they could consider that you know, a fire door is protecting against. Understood, but we now need to do what Callum said, and that's filter it back to something that is manageable.
Well, the only other reason I ask, and sorry to labour on this point, but because this working group is talking about advisory and I'm in the advisory mode, I'm saying to myself now, do I have to advise on, for you, Callum, if it's a seed change, do I have to really point out absolutely all the risks on the list? Because to me, some of them to a certain extent favour some manufacturers other than others. You mentioned about the weight of fire doors, for instance. You know, it doesn't, the weight can only, there's a risk that somebody that's frail and old may not be able to open the fire door. Well, so we then come into a conversation. What is the weight that they can, this frail person can actually open? And then when you find out, which I did, for a particular manufacturer, that that frail person couldn't open any of the doors regardless of the weight because of what you just said about the door closer.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm saying about the risks as we're listing them at the moment, is that they are very heavy on zero risk. And I was wondering how we build in a proportionality where we can actually move forward and have it as a really valuable tool, rather than us getting bogged down into every conversation.
No, sure.
But yeah, I think the risk we're talking about, Jim, is the fact that in putting a heavy door in the wall, if there is a fire, it won't last 30 minutes. And this is the bit that it might only last 20 minutes. Now, at that point, that's fine. But, and this is something that I've been thinking about, because I would think that probably 90% of older fire dampers have been installed incorrectly, as Matt pointed, or Jim, as Callum pointed out in that picture. You know, I was trying not to discuss the fact that it'd been installed appallingly. It was just the fact that somebody was trying to fit it in, and that's one of the reasons it was installed appallingly. Yeah. And the other thing is that when somebody goes away, there'll all be lots of nice board round there and some mastic and a bit of paint, and you won't know what's inside there. And unfortunately, at the moment with fire, because everything's being highlighted, everybody's been incredibly careful about their risk. But the other point is you know, because of the testing that I've done, if I go to a site and I see a really old fire damper and it's got concrete all around it, whether it's been installed properly or not, actually it's good enough. But if I go to a drywall installation, I wouldn't dare put my name to a risk on it, because I don't know which bit's going to fail first. And it's the fire risk, not the ability to the fact that people can't get through the doors on a daily basis. It's the hidden bit that, will it work when it needs to work in fire and smoke safety, and will it fulfill the time that it's supposed to work for? And that's the bit. And it's such a specialized subject, and there's so little insurance available that nobody will say, oh, actually, that'll be all right.
But there's not the opportunity for advice in the process either at present, and that's what concerns me. I mean, I was a number of years ago, I was asked by Skanska to go in and advise on a couple of projects where they had some early stage design detail from the architect, and they were tendering on it, and they just literally wanted to know what to include within that tender, on what was potentially a high risk detail that wouldn't work, and therefore they needed to put some caveats against that. That is a rare occurrence, and it was on a commercial sort of basis that they wanted to speak to me and have that sort of advice available. But that type of thing needs to be happening far more often, far earlier, and not just on a commercial basis, but actually on the basis that we want to know about these things early, so that we can address them, and so that we're prepared. We've talked about sort of someone mentioned about spatial coordination. Absolutely, I believe that has to be considered earlier on in the process than it is being currently. At present, that is often only considered once the specialist contractor has been appointed. The number of projects where, and this isn't specifically relating to fire performance, but this is probably the most obvious example of spatial coordination. Pretty much every single high-rise residential project that we work on, there is insufficient space for the ceiling construction underneath the services to meet the ceiling height. And the main reason for that is service obstruction. We have huge, only the other day we were working on one that was a 4 metre by 4.5 metre wide high level service obstruction, which prevented over that area the inclusion of any ceiling hangers. So we couldn't get a ceiling hanger up within, and they're supposed to be on a 1200 by 1200 grid in this case, and we couldn't get one in that area. So therefore, there has to be a subgrid in there. So something like a unistrut arrangement, 41 by 82 or something like that, running underneath, spanning that distance and fixing the ceiling up into that at that point. However, because the services were within that sort of ceiling void zone, there was insufficient space to get even the ceiling construction in properly, let alone an additional subgrid. But that's only being realised at a point when the job has to stop and the contractor has labour standing because they can't continue because they can't get this in there.
So from a simple point of view, what we've been discussing anyway is that the spatial design needs to be completed much earlier, and the products that are going to be installed need to be selected before the coordinated design work is completed. So that those are those are two of the key things, right? So the question is for this group, what information, what evidence do we need? What questions does Bex, for example, who's from Housing Association, what would Bex need to do to be confident that at Gateway 2, the building, that particular risk has been mitigated? Bex, do you have anything to contribute on this? Sorry to throw you in. I know you're more information management, aren't you? But
oh gosh, where am I? There I am. Hello, hi. Sorry, I've sort of been listening in and out.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, it's fine. What is it you wanted to? Sorry,
I apologize. Yeah, so or maybe anybody else that's on the client end of things. But the point is, what we're trying to do, the basic question that we're trying to answer is, what information do developers, designers, contractors, operators, manufacturers need to know about the elements that go to make up a compartment that will prevent that will mitigate the risk? So what do we need to know about the door, the installation of the etc., the smoke damper, etc.? What do you need to know to be able to be confident that you're taking on the risk? Because essentially that's what it's about. You are taking on the risk and liability, and it isn't down to one organisation. It's not just down to Balfour Beatty as the main contractor. This responsibility is being shared. That's what the Building Safety Act is really making it. So the question is, what information do we actually need to work with? And I'm just wondering, if I come back to the spreadsheet that I was showing, and you're quite right, Jim, that there's a hell of a lot on here. But maybe one way of addressing this would be to say, right, this is the information that that was said was useful as far as fire doors is concerned, and the same with knowing who the manufacturer of the door closer is, etc. And exactly the same with smoke dampers, the detection system, etc. In going through that exercise, there's going to be some of this, probably 80–90% of it, that is already a given thing that you will get in terms of documentation, probably. So the question is, would some of that information come in declarations of performance, for example? Would some of the information come from commissioning certificates? Would some of the information come from data sheets? And if that's the case, then we need to be ensuring that we get a declaration of performance as a document from somebody at that level. Now, declarations of performance carry different attributes or different properties according to what type of product it is. So the declaration of performance for a fire door is going to be different than one for an AOV. So we then need to then look maybe at the next level down and say, of the information that's on that AOV, what is an essential characteristic, which is the term, and therefore could we get that information in a machine readable form so that we can automatically test to see if it's been provided? Because what we're trying to move away from, I believe, is a document-based culture. Now, I guess the question is for the group, how much of this can we? We're using this event next week. To some extent, it's been fantastic already because we're drilling down into some detail, but we now need to turn something around. Otherwise, we're going to look daft next week.
George, can I just say something at this stage?
Thank you, Steve. Yeah,
I think this is really interesting. But looking at it from kind of our perspective, what would be you take from the build is great, and gathering all of that information is fantastic. Looking at it from a fire risk, that building's been built before it's been occupied, and all the specifications been done and everything else. Now a fire risk assessor goes in to assess the risk. Now it's been occupied. Really, you should do some kind of a desktop study on that building before you go in there of how that building's been designed, what's actually been put into it, what's it been standards has it been designed to. I can near on categorically state that information is impossible to get hold of easily. And that should be that when you're looking at all of that data, that yeah, there's a lot of data in there, but looking at it from that perspective, somebody assessing the risk of that building when it's occupied, what would they want? And I think that's important of stripping some of that back. Why has an AOV been put in? You know, why have we got this sort of, why has it been designed with these travel distances? Because it's been done like that because the amount of occupation, but we go into that to do a fire risk assessment, that occupation is greater than what it's been worked out for, then I'm kind of looking at it from the other end, rather than from the design and build. How are we going to continue to manage that building to the specification it's been designed for? Does that make sense?
Very much so to me. Matt?
I was just thinking, George, that you mentioned about the sort of how do we make sure that the information that's sort of published is acknowledged and is available and is considered. But some of what we're going to be looking at here isn't information that is published from any particular, and perhaps not even something that the manufacturers are necessarily aware of. And I come back to that stealing scenario that I was talking about previously. I'm and we spoke about parametrics previously, George, and how they could be how they could be used to sort of try and identify some of these items earlier on. Now, it surprises me that with this ceiling scenario, which I see so often, it's a very simple aspect of if I can't get a ceiling hanger in at 1200 centres, I need additional support in there. Yep. So there needs to be additional depth allowance. Yet I've never seen that implemented. I've never seen it on a project where I've received that information at late stage and that's already been considered because it's been identified early in the process. And one of the reasons I think that is it's not published by any manufacturer because it's not, the ceiling system manufacturer doesn't provide the supporting structure. They don't provide the unistructure arrangement, etc. And it's not something that's considered because quite often early stages it's looked at in respect to the fact, well, the service subcontractor has got a subgrid in there, can't we hand from that or something, some sort of arrangement, and it's missed. And this is where that knowledge that comes in at a point where it's too late needs to somehow be identified earlier in the process, possibly through a sort of parametric process, as in that we get that information, harness it and introduce it early, but somehow that there needs to be some recognition of that.
No, I think that's very helpful. Karen, Bex, you've got your hand up. Thank you.
No, that's right. As you know, sort of I am client side based in building safety, so sort of my angle on things is maintaining that golden thread, making sure that we meet the requirements of the Building Safety Act, and so the information that we would need from our side, you know, is the fire safety and structural information. And Steve, the thing you mentioned about the fire strategy and the changes, all of that should be addressed in the gateways, as per, you know, and all of those changes should be addressed there. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, I'm kind of looking at probably not so much new builds, but previous builds where trying to collate all of that information to what you need is really difficult to get hold of. And I wouldn't imagine there's that many fire risk assessors that's going in that are spending the time and effort, because a lot of this is going to be financially driven of, you know, certainly people tendering for fire risk assessments, so they haven't got the time and often the inclination to actually research the site they're going to, or the building that they're going to do, to gather that information together. Now, if we can have that in a very easily readable format, surely that's got to be a benefit to the fire risk assessors. I agree with you that on new builds now, the information is definitely easier to get hold of, but collating it all together as part of the fire risk, I have to sit there and collate together all of this information together to collate it, to make a judgment on what I think was the spec of this building, rather than somebody saying, right, this is how this building should operate, this is how it's operated, this is all the equipment that makes that operate. If that was a document that was available, or better still, data, then I can, and like George was saying, there's lots of data, lots of different people want different amounts of data. And I think being able to take snippets out of the data to be able to say, right, from a fire risk assessor, I want this, and this. From a maintenance perspective, you want this, and this. And I think that's the problem, that a lot of the data is overwhelming. You look at,
I would tend to agree. Yeah.
Where would you start?
And that isn't that the reason for these discussions? It's to feed into those decisions. So this is all really great because we can take that as a client. Okay, great. So fire risk assessors, that's a key demographic we need to address in our data sets. Cool, we can do that because we're at the level now, and you know, we're working with in other groups as well to define the employers' requirements, EIRs and the OIRs and all of that great stuff. And you know, we're not in the point of implementation, we're in the point of let's get this right first time. And so I think surely we can implement that as well. And there's the interface as well between the like you say, the different materials in the buildings, which is what we're finding as well. So, you know, your fire door is great, but hang on, is there I don't know what's the wall connected. That's a very basic one, but it's the interfaces between the different fire fire protection elements and passive. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly where I've come to with this as well. Callum.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Going back to what Matt was saying, I mean, I know, and I get what you're saying about your spatial considerations, but George has got a lessons learned area on his black box site. That's something that I think should go into the lessons learned. Now, just to run through what we do now, we've got a lessons learned database. That lessons learned database picks up on all our projects. Everybody feeds into that database or has the ability to feed into that database. And when you capture a lesson learned, it gets assigned to a subject matter expert. That subject matter expert has to do something meaningful with each lesson. And that would be so updating an ITP, a change in process or procedure or guidance, but something meaningful has to be updated or justify not doing it. So we have that continuous feedback loop to drive improvement to all our processes. And that feeds live into the projects that are underway at the time. So it is quite a fast moving way of improving what we do. And I think what you've identified there is an issue that's recurring, which George could pick up and put into this work stream. But I think that the first thing you should do is record it on the lessons learned database and see if we can drive a change somewhere in a British standard or sort of feed into something more meaningful. I think in terms of the data that we get, I think a lot of it's something that's been picked up in the Building Safety Act and the Building Safety Bill as competence. Sometimes we don't know what we need to know. We just don't know. We don't know everything. And I think this is a great opportunity for us all to feed into a way of driving that data capture that's standardised across the industry and takes away that doubt, which we've all got. Just another thing I wanted to say about the process. For me, when I'm looking at competence and compliance across the piece, when I go to a project, I'm looking first and foremost to say, what did the client require? What did the contractor specify? What did the contractor install? And I'm looking at compliance at every stage, and I'm measuring across that piece. And then I'm looking to see how it was commissioned. And in a lot of times, the commissioning certificates are caveated. They couldn't get access to something. So was it ever done? We'll never know because the records aren't there, but the contractor would probably swear blind it was. So there's always that doubt. But and then obviously into maintenance, was it maintained appropriately? And there's always a breakdown at some stage in that process. There's always information that's missing. I think, Jim, you've alluded to that a few times. And I think that's the basis I would look at this advisory group.
Callum, would you be, I mean, just for the asset types that we're looking at here, which there's only 5 or 6, and actually it's related to a particular mitigation, is that something that you could give us a little bit of a steer on, so that we can, how would you, as an SME, how would you approach that? What you've just described there, that check process.
Well, I could share something with you afterwards if you want to send something through. Obviously,
not now. No. Yeah. I'm very conscious of the fact I'm going to. Jim, could you bear with me, because Debbie's obviously leading this group with Dave Peacock, and I feel as though I've completely usurped it with our. Which I apologise, but it's been. Well,
really, you've got to get next week sorted, so it's fair enough. I was just picking up on Callum's point on the competence piece, and the other thing we need to influence is there's been a big benchmarking competence exercise gone on from working group 2 on the installers group in terms of where current competence is, and then they're going to start building out these new competence frameworks, around dry lining, cladding, all sorts of things, fire doors, and we need to influence this. They're not even aware of this work at the moment, So, you know, this can also feed into that. So I just wanted to put that on the table. Then we need to make that connection. You know, if people don't have a good understanding of the concept of space and spatial coordination, you know, that should be something that is in across many trades probably to understand that. Yeah, I haven't
Sure.
seen it in existing training and other standards. So I think there's some conceptual stuff here as well that's important.
Okay, Jim, is it a quick one? You're on mute still, Jim.
From a risk assessment point of view, I do see in the future a lot of risk assessors seeking assurance from others, both with Debbie's point and with Steve's point, is because we would need to do that if their records were incomplete. For a complete risk assessment, we would need to pick up on Callum's records of what went on with very crucial elements within a building, because as I say, Debbie would definitely need assurance from others on certain items. So that's where I see risk assessment going.
Good. Okay. Thank you. If I go back to my spreadsheet that I was showing earlier, is it possible that, you know, for example, Paul, Steve's been in touch with me. Paul has introduced me to a specialist, a manufacturer, and I'm just wondering whether we could pick a particular, you know, Matt, for example, on dry lining. Would you be able to look at the information requirements on dry lining and maybe do this type of RACI type of thing? Is that something that there's not that many? There's, you know, probably 20 or 30 items, and you can probably discount some of them. I'm just wondering whether that would be a useful thing to be able to do, and then we can issue that ahead of the meeting so that we've got something for people to focus on.
It shouldn't be too much of a problem, George. I'm just looking at a couple that are on there, and there's a couple I might sort of take off or replace with other ones if that's acceptable. But
of course, no, absolutely, no. I mean, I'm very happy for us to cut these back, because otherwise we're just going to be overwhelmed. The same with penetration seals. You know, maybe there's a couple of people that could look at that. I can get somebody to look at the AOVs. Paul, could you maybe talk to Steve about the smoke dampers? Could you? I think you.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I can go through the smoke dampers.
Yeah.
And is the AOVs, are they which type of AOVs are they? Are they the smoke damper AOVs or are they the external ones?
I don't know. It will be up to us to decide, really. It's really
well, I can have a look at both of those if you send that through. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You just want a similar thing to the fire doors?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking, Paul, you were Paul Oakley. Are you still on the call?
Yeah, we're here, George.
Yeah. Do you think that's the approach, or should we have more of a RACI type of tick box?
I think the first thing is working out the list of actors, parties,
yeah,
and then looking at the RACI approach to those. I said there is a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of work involved with that, and that's one of the sort of big areas. But if we're focused on a specific area, I think that's where we end up. It's going to need to end up doing.
Yeah,
is defining those. even if there's sort of like a high level grouping that we define, things that come under designers, manufacturers, constructors, installers, maintenance. Yeah,
I guess that's afterwards, isn't it? I mean, at the moment, I've done this myself, so I know it can be done. There's probably cleverer ways of doing it, but this, it gives us at least a base information set. Now, what we might do is take these and put them into an individual spreadsheet for fire doors with 4 boxes or something like that. Maybe that would be a good way of doing it, so that, Paul, you could just go down that and say, for the AOV, this would be coming from the manufacturer, this would be coming from the installer. Do you think that would be helpful?
Yeah, I think yes.
Or stick 4 boxes in after each one.
Yes.
Yeah, and rather than a stream of consciousness list, to make it easier, maybe have a separate line per item.
No, exactly. So I think what you're saying there is put this into a spreadsheet with a separate line per item.
Yes, and then 4 boxes after it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah. Okay. I'm conscious we've got about 5 minutes left, George. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So should we talk about decom quickly?
Yes, you could just give a quick overview of that. Yes, and then Dave, Dave Peacock, I suggest we try and catch up, after the meeting and after this DCW event. Yes, to sort of plan next steps.
Yeah, that's fine, Debbie. No problem.
Dave, you're coming to the event, aren't you?
Yeah.
Are you, Debbie? You can't make it? Or?
No, I don't think I'll be there at the moment. I've just got a big project started, so on combined competence and compliance in the social housing sector, organisational competency management. So pretty time consuming.
Okay. Is anybody else on this call coming to the DCW event?
I'm hoping to pop in, but I'm with the tall buildings at FireX for the 3 days. So
okay, but Matt, you're coming, are you?
I believe so, George. Yes.
Great, fantastic, thank you. Good. All right. Yeah. So I'll just explain briefly what's happening. The building regulations. Some of you may know that of the work that we've been doing with the BRE with what's called the templator, which allows us to take information and create standardized data templates for capturing information, which is currently being used to compile product information, manufacturers' product information, but it's also being used to capture other data sets. Now, there's been a R&D project going on, Innovate UK project, I think. Anyway, it doesn't matter. With the BRE, Cardiff University, and the Construction Innovation Hub, taking the building regulations and turning them into a digital format. Now, that is a big step forward, and they've done it already for Part L and Part M, and they're about they've done it as well for Part B, but it's Part B for schools. But apparently, there's a lot of alignment between Part B for schools and Part B more generally. So that work that BRE and the working group has done is now being added to the templator. So we should be able to see some of that over the next, probably by the end of May. And that means that some of the building regs information will be machine readable. That's probably as much as I can say at the moment. I don't know.
To some level of quality. It'd be interesting to see how they do. Yes, because in my world we do things like mine ISO standards and other stuff like that and make it machine readable. So I'm waiting to see what the quality looks like, George.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
Right.
the other related project that Construction Innovation Hub ran was the value toolkit around encouraging value-based decision making across projects and programs. I don't know how aware people are of that at the moment. It's certainly be coming in strongly in the public sector in terms of the procurement processes, and obviously it's a chance to influence some of this, because a key part of it is making sure clients get the right advice on the right things at the right time.
Yes. I mean, that might be something, Callum, that we talk about at with the tier 1 group, because Martin's leading on the contractual side, isn't he? So that might be a useful thing to get Debbie to update us on. Or we actually arrange a session specifically on it and invite everybody to it from all the groups.
Yes, I mean, probably the best person to invite would be Robert Isles from CIHS, who's been doing the sort of rollout and beta testing and the sort of training and awareness raising on it. Or here's say the right person. They're a client of mine. I've been building the competency profiles for them to go with the sort of personas and roles that will be needed. So that's been quite an interesting exercise. So I'm fairly familiar with it, but I would say it's better to get someone from CIH direct than me interpret.
Sure. Okay. All right. So I'll issue that spreadsheet to everybody.
Yeah.
From what we've said today, do we think that the example that Paul McSollig gave us of the protected staircase, is that probably going to take us down the wrong track for next week? That it seems to me that it probably is doing. I think it's taking us into a level of design that is more complex. But I need your feedback on this. What do you think?
Well, it's just a fire door, so I think it's perfectly acceptable. As you just, I mean, you on about the fact that it's a 30-minute one and not a 60-minute?
No, it was the rest of the question. The paper that Paul produced was about the issue about different services being put through a fire corridor, through a fire compartment, or not fire compartment, the what's it called, the protected staircase.
Protected staircase.
Yeah.
All right.
That's a different topic, I think, isn't it, Paul? Would you say?
Well, I'd say it depends whether we're looking at the root of the smoke or what we're looking at. So, I mean, the scenario is that the fire is likely to start in the apartment and not the common areas.
Yeah.
But the person leaves, lets a little bit of smoke out of the apartment. Hopefully, at that point, shuts the door behind them. Nobody else knows that there's a fire. They leave. The little bit of smoke that gets into the corridor triggers the smoke control system. And then the fire brigade comes up, and as any other smoke escapes, it's extracted either naturally or mechanically through the shafts, or you have a stairwell pressurization and it blows it into another shaft or out of a window. So it really comes down to what you want to talk about in terms of, is that door, because I think that door doesn't have the door into the apartment. I don't think it's required to have any smoke seals on it, but a door into a they have intumescent seals for fire, but it may not have smoke seals. I'm not sure, to be honest.
Yeah.
And then we've got the potential for services over the top. So My suggestion would be have those drawings to hand with you of a usable size.
Yes.
But then maybe have Yerrick's
examples
as well. Again, A3 or A2 or something like that.
Yeah.
And then if somebody says, well, we don't really know what a system is, then somebody can take them aside quietly and show them the larger drawing of the system.
Sure. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Good. So George, good luck with it all next week for those attending. Yes, and obviously be interesting to see what comes out of it, and how that steers us really. Yes, I think because it probably will set some lines of direction. Hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah. What we're also going to do, I've been threatening to do this for a long time, or offering and then not doing it, is we're going to get the WhatsApp group going. So that we can exchange some things over this next few days. So what I hope that's okay. I'm going to invite you all to a WhatsApp group, and then if you've got some suggestions to make, then we can capture that. Has anybody got any concerns or objections about that?
I've only got one concern, and that is
the wrong kind of
I'm
phone.
still on a burner.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm sure I'll catch up. So I'm sorry to be such a dinosaur.
Yeah.
But,
There's a web client, Jim.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes. Yeah. You can get it on the web. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll be a web client then. That's another direction. I've done quite well under lockdown, I can assure you. Although you wouldn't have seen me 5 years ago on this, that's for sure.
Brilliant. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, everybody. And yes, David, we'll be in touch. Very good. Thanks very much for everyone's time. Much appreciated.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.